Hello and welcome to this week's Tech Plugged In. So we have several stories this week, many about AMD. So we have an AdoredTV leak with an update of planned Navi cards. iOS 13 possibly ditching support for the iPhone 6, iPhone 5S and iPhone SE. SSD prices expected to fall below 10 cents per gigabyte. And three separate stories about the AMD Ryzen 3000 CPUs. AdoredTV has information from several insider sources and analysis of existing rumours that the Navi GPUs will be named in line with the Ryzen 3000 series as the RX 3000 series. The performance is expected to be in line and slight improvements over the Vega 64 and Radeon 7. So there are several different chips that they may use, including the Navi 12, the Navi 10 and the Navi 20. So these chips will vary in the number of compute units and will deliver different performances. So from the bottom of the lineup, as you can see, we have the RX 3060, which is expected to have 4 gigs of GDDR6 and be in line with an RX 580 with a 75 watt TDP. Above it is the RX 3070 with 40 compute units, 8 gigs of GDDR6 and will be in line with a Vega 56 at 130 watts TDP. You get similar climbs up the stack, including an XT series on certain chips with a few more compute units and a higher TDP. We don't have clock speeds as of yet, however we can hope that these clock speeds will be reasonably high and possibly provide users with the headroom for overclocking to get more powerful GPUs for price. Now, apart from the Navi 20 chips, we also have other GPUs which are expected to come to market in the PlayStation 5 and Xbox One Anaconda. They are both expected to feature an RX 3080 XT class GPU with 12.9 teraflops of power and supposedly ray tracing support, which should be interesting. So we have expected prices. So going off of the RX 3080 XT, which will possibly have ray tracing, it's expected to be similar to an RTX 2070 and cost $330. Now these prices are obviously suspected prices, but with these prices, Nvidia may be forced to pull down the price of their own RTX lineup to be competitive with AMD. Apple is quite possibly ditching support for several of their devices when iOS 13 comes out. It will supposedly not support the iPhone 6, the 5S or the SE. Now, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference 2019 is just months away, and we obviously get wind of details of what the giant may have in store for users. So we have a rumour pointing out that iOS 13 will ditch several generations of iPhone models and will not be the same as iOS 12, which was compatible with all devices that could run iOS 11. If the rumour has any credibility to it, we will see many devices ditched. So this will give the iPhone 5S an advantage in its longevity, supposedly, as it has had supposedly one more firmware update than the others that are being ditched. This update is expected to arrive sometime in September, so not long after the launch of the iPhone 11, if that is what it is called. So this will mean that the updates will be ditched for these devices to try and get users to upgrade and possibly to be able to add new features without having to struggle to support legacy features. So in the iPad category, we will lose the iPad Mini 2 and the iPad Air. The iPad Air was launched in the same year as the 5S, so it makes sense for them to forego iOS 13 support together. There will be more to the story, so expect possible updates later on as the time comes closer. Hard drives may be starting to fade out of general usage for a standard desktop PC, as SSD prices are expected to fall, with the price per gigabyte of 512GB and 1TB SSDs expected to fall below 10 cents a gigabyte for the first time by the end of this year. DRAM Exchange has said that the lower prices should lead to 128GB SSDs, which is the standard currently for your cheap boot SSD, to be replaced by their 512GB counterparts as the new standard for this. As the price drop is expected to also extend to the 1TB versions, these products will now reach a much larger section of the market who, such as myself, would not be able to afford them. All of these changes are going to lead to shifts in large amounts of the market. SSDs are now in more than half of laptops, and PCIe SSDs are expected to reach a similar portion of the market, and thanks to the relative price similarity between them and their SATA counterparts. So we will obviously get improved performance in everything from your low-end laptop all the way up to your top-end build. So it's obviously no wonder that HDD sales are expected to fall this year. Now, PC hard drive sales could fall by as much as 48% in 2019 as we all shift to SSDs. They will still have their niche, obviously, among enterprises and people that need external storage or very large amounts of storage. Now, there are some good news for storage companies, as DRAM Exchange has said that demand is expected to pick up because of the traditional peak season and increased stocking demand from new Apple devices. So this should allow SSD makers to slow down the decline in their prices, but continued drops are inevitable. And now it is time for all our Ryzen 3000 stories. So AMD has supposedly been showcasing 16-core and 12-core Ryzen 3000 series CPUs to OEMs, so motherboard manufacturers, etc. So they're supposedly showing a 12-core with really high clocks to board makers. So this has been leaked by AdoredTV, and they have been consistently right on the money with leaks and sources. So this leak appears to be very legitimate, and the talk about 12 and 16 cores is also consistent with what we have been seeing over the past several months and from various sources. So you have several leaks on price and performance. So we are expected to have 6 cores at the entry level, 8 cores at mid-range, 12 cores at the new high end, and the ultra high end 16 cores. So the lineup is supposedly going to consist of a 3300, 3300X and a 3300G on the entry level, 3600, 3600X and 3600G for the mid-range, and then a 3700X and a 3700 at the high end, with the new Ryzen 9 lineup being the ultra high end with a 3800X and a 3850X. So we obviously have rumours of clock speed. So the APU with the 3300G is expected to be a 65 watt chip with 3 GHz base and 3.8 boost, and it's supposedly going to come out in Q3 of 2019. And if you contrast this with the 3800X from the Ryzen 9 lineup, it's expected to have a base of 3.9 GHz and boost all the way up to 3.7 GHz, whilst having a TDP of only 125 watts. So the launch dates for some things may be inaccurate, obviously, as they appear to have been delayed, but with these chips, they are expected to be extremely good, as they were shown at CES to outperform the 9900K whilst drawing significantly less watts. AMD updates with their chips that show progress, so they have moved on to what's called the second stepping of their Ryzen 3000 series CPUs with designation B0. So A0 is generally first revision, first test, and B0 means that there has been a large revision or update. Now, as processors developed, the manufacturers refine them and produce newer versions, so this is quite normal. Now, A0 is typically the first silicon that comes out of the lab, and A1 and A2 are just minor revisions. So, in certain people's opinion, the CES demo would have been an A0 or slightly more revised CPU. B0 means that they have made significant and perhaps final revision to what AMD will release as the Ryzen 3000 series. ASUS has not updated all of its motherboards with the new BIOS, but it has updated boards with A320, B350, X370 and B450 chipsets. This is a good sign for compatibility, since AMD technically never guaranteed that older chipsets would be compatible, just that the sockets would be. So this is not the first Ryzen BIOS to contain coding for Zen 2. However, it's the first time a BIOS update has been released explicitly for these CPUs. Since we do not have a concrete launch date yet, it's a good sign that these CPUs are just around the corner. Computex is most likely for reveal or possibly a launch date, or the launch itself. However, this is unlikely, as AMD has promised a release in the summer. With the summer approaching, it seems unlikely that we will have a C0 revision for launch, meaning that Ryzen 3000 could be coming sooner rather than later. With such a small amount of updates, it's quite possible that AMD's CPU development has gone very smoothly. Now finally, for our final Ryzen story and our final story overall this week, we have the Zen 2 chips will supposedly support up to a maximum of 5000 MHz DDR4 memory speeds. Now these speeds are going to be very good for the integrated GPUs if previous chips are anything to say, and the references also show that the CPUs may not all be able to hit this speed, but this is going to be the maximum speed that can be attained by the next generation of the chips. Currently, the second gen Ryzen processors max speed of 4000 listed, but they can't reach those speeds. Overclockers might be able to hit the 5 GHz memory speed limits using liquid nitrogen, but from a consumer perspective, these speeds may be far from reachable. Now, the X570 motherboard should allow for better memory clocks and support using Zen 2 processors, and these chips will be better than what we got from the first and second gen Ryzen chips. So this will definitely stir up some interest among overclockers and enthusiasts alike, along with the added support for PCIe Gen 4, which is something the consumer market has been looking forward to for years now.